What's going on, everybody? It's Professor Zeus, and I'm back with another video. If this is your first time at the channel, just know I greatly appreciate you for stopping by. Go ahead and hit subscribe. We're on our way to 2,000 subscribers. We're taking it the humble route. We're going to keep giving you guys as much content as we can, quality information, interesting breakdowns to look at life in an interesting way. But other than that, let's get into the video. Guys, last time we spoke about the huge divide right now between the Republican and Conservative Party. We have the pro-war neocons, the anti-war conservatives, and people called the bootlickers. From that video up until today, things have gotten extremely real. June 21st, which was, I believe, Saturday, the U.S. had bombed 3 Iranian nuclear sites, Fordo, Natanz, and Isfahan, which essentially escalated the Israel-Iran conflict. And, President Trump is now talking about regime change, as you see from this Truth Social post, with his MIGA movement, which is Make Iran Great Again. And this, has, set the conservative world on fire. So, we're going to talk about how all 3 sides are reacting and, see if, unity is actually possible or if the divide is too deep. So let's try to, break this down. So on June 21st, the U.S. launched Operation Midnight Hammer, I should say, hitting Iran's key nuclear facilities with B-2 bombers and bunker buster bombs. And President Trump called it a spectacular military success. And he claimed that these sites were completely obliterated. Some satellite imagery came out and, shows some significant damage at Fordo with a lot of, craters and debris and stuff like that on the floor. Although at the same time, Iran is claiming that, these sites were evacuated and those bombs or those blows were not as severe as anybody thought. So then President Trump came back to Truth Social and, he came out with this truth. It's not politically correct to use the term regime change, but if the current Iranian regime is unable to make Iran great again, why wouldn't there be a regime change? MIGA. So a lot of people saw, MIGA, the term MIGA, and was probably, shocked and stunned. President Trump's own team, like, Defense Secretary Pete Hegseth and Secretary of State Marco Rubio, they had insisted that a lot of these strikes weren't about regime change, but a precision hit on Iran's nuclear program, because everybody keeps making the debate that, Iran can have nukes, even though they're a sovereign country. I mean, other countries have nukes, but, I digress. But at the same time, President Trump's words suggest a broader goal, which contradict his campaign promises to avoid Middle East wars. Again, what I said in the last video is that, a lot of people voted for President Trump because he insisted that there would be no new wars, that he would be the president for peace. But, since he's been in office, there had just been more escalating conflicts, from tariffs. We've covered the tariffs. From Ukraine and Russia, that's still going on. Palestine and Israel, that's still going on. And now Israel and Iran, right? So a lot of people are kind of confused, because it's like, when you're campaigning, you're saying one thing, but now that you're in the driver's seat, you have like a different tune, right? And I think that's extremely, extremely interesting, right? And again, the Hodge twins, they posted something, calling out neocons for, pushing war for Israel and urging, peace and different things like that. And the real question is President Trump signaling a new direction, or is this just his rhetoric? A lot of people I've seen on social media said that, he's just trolling, he loves to do these theatrics and stuff like that. But we're in a place right now where theatrics and things like that, I don't know if it's the right time. My dad always used to tell me and my younger brothers that, there's a time and place for everything. If it's not appropriate, then, you shouldn't really do it. But a lot of people are trying to say that, a lot of conservative people are saying like this is not appropriate at all. And I try to usually go on the conservative subreddit and see how people feel, and it's interesting to say the least. I pull up some posts right now, but it's like I see a lot of people say they at first were saying, President Trump, he's the president for peace, and he's not really about regime change. And now people are saying, oh, peace is through strength, meaning like maybe there are going to be wars, but we have to be the ones fighting it and different things like that. And I just think that, obviously you want to trust your leader and different things like that. But when your leader is like, you don't really know how he's, trying to go about things, again, I always say politics is an interesting game. The politicians are supposed to represent us, right? The commander-in-chief, the president, is supposed to be a representation of the American people, right? But at the same time, I don't have to blindly follow the leader. I should be able to still have critical thinking skills and say, hey, he did this. I don't necessarily agree with this. Hey, he did that. I agree with that. But for a lot of people to switch their tone, it's like people aren't even thinking for themselves anymore. Like herd mentality is at an all-time high, and I honestly think it's really crazy. And then again, the neocons, they're extremely happy. Sean Hannity, after speaking with President Trump, he was extremely happy about the 6 bunker buster bombs dropping on Fordo, and then people like Mark Levin, a longtime Iran war hawk, like he really wants a war with Iran. He's essentially framed the strikes as a historic win for both Israel and America, right? And then on Twitter, you got neocons like Sir Stephen KJ mocking those who doubted Trump, claiming he outsmarted the war hawks by limiting the strikes. But at the same time, why are we striking? We're supposed to be right now in a place of peace and figuring out what is the best way to fix our internal issues as Americans on American soil, right? But now this guy, Sir Stephen KJ, is like, oh, he's limiting the strikes. I mean, we still struck. People are arguing that this was a necessary move to stop Iran's nuclear ambitions, with allies like Israel's Bibi Netanyahu praising Trump's bold decision. And at the same time, the anti-war conservatives like Tucker Carlson, they're extremely mad, right? Because before the strikes, people like Steve Bannon, he warned on his, I think the War Room podcast, that regime change would only tear the country apart, right? Tucker Carlson, who, I talked about in the last video when he spoke with Ted Cruz, he called the strikes a betrayal of the America First promise. Again, MAGA, Make America Great Again, America First. These are all ideologies that's supposed to put America in the forefront. But I don't know if we've been putting America in the forefront, And then you got a post from users like Imperium First stating that, President Trump's base voted for no more wars and obviously feel disillusioned or fractured. They're arguing that these strikes risk dragging the U.S. into another endless conflict, especially with Iran's threats of retaliation through missiles or proxies like the Houthis. Look, I'm 31, right? So I lived through the whole, Iraq conflict. Obviously, there's still a lot of things that we don't know about that whole situation, but the whole premise was that there was weapons of mass destruction in Iraq and in the Middle East and different things like that. We never really found those necessarily weapons of mass destruction, but now that region is war torn, right? Look at Libya, look at Sudan, look at Lebanon. Like that whole region has just been going through a lot, right? And I probably, have a whole nother video of that. But, some of those countries were doing, quote unquote, well off before we intervened, And then again, we got to talk about the bootlickers, right? Like Cat Turd and Laura Loomer, who align with President Trump's base, but they're avoiding criticizing him or the Israeli government, right? Before the strikes, the Hash twins, in my last video where we talked about that tweet with the three groups of conservatives, they warned that these voices hesitate to question President Trump's moves because they're fearing a lot of backlash. Now, after these strikes, a lot of people are now rallying behind President Trump with ex post praising his decisive actions. Others, like Representative Marjorie Taylor Greene, are kind of in the fence because they're posting prayers for peace without directly endorsing or condemning the strikes. So this group obviously seems a little bit torn, right? Should you be loyal to Trump, or it's like you want to be loyal to Trump, but you're really uneasy about war? And the thing about it, right? The thing that's even more interesting is where the Republican Party is going to go from here, because President Trump, this is his last term. Obviously, he can't run for president again, but Republicans, conservatives have an interesting decision at their hands right now, because as President Trump is leaving, they've kind of molded the Republican Party behind President Trump's ideology. But once he leaves, how is that going to look, right? Might have to make a video about that. So now the challenge is a lot of people's silence on the influence from Israel, right? A lot of posts highlight growing awareness of Israel's lobbying power, like AIPAC, and their ability to sway in Congress. But a lot of these voices rarely touch it. For example, like a lot of neoconservatives celebrate Israel's role in, pushing these strikes, and at the same time, anti-war conservatives are like trying to question why these strikes even happen. And at the same time, the bootlickers, they're staying quiet, trying to just focus on being loyal to President Trump. So this fracture, this split, makes unity between conservatives and Republicans alike. It makes it really tough, right? Can they bridge the gap with anti-war conservatives to push back on all these war talks like all these neoconservatives are saying? I don't know, right? Because the neocons, they are doubling down. You even have people like John Bolton, he was a critic of President Trump. He's extremely happy, saying that these strikes are like long overdue. And then the anti-war crowd is feeling betrayed. They're pointing to President Trump's 2016 pledge to end the forever wars. The bootlickers, I don't know. Like, if they join the anti-war push, they could sway, President Trump's base to demand peace. But at the same time, President Trump and this "Make Iran Great Again" post suggest that he's actually listening to the neoconservatives, raising a lot of fears of escalation. Iran's already promised retaliation, and the Middle East at large is on edge. But the facts are clear, right? The strikes happen. President his rhetoric is shifting, and the right, Republicans, conservatives, they're fractured. Unity would require anti-war conservatives and President Trump loyalists to challenge the neocon narrative altogether, right? But at the same time, a lot of people's emotions, they're running high. They're on Twitter, and everybody's arguing all day. Like, I'm just on Twitter just looking at everybody argue. Like, this is crazy. But I don't know if they can find common ground before all of this spirals even further. But let's see let's see what happens, man. But let me know what you guys think. Can conservatives unite against war, or is the MIGA movement too divisive? Drop your thoughts below. Let me know what you think. And if you want me to comment or give my opinion on any topic or anything in the news related, drop that also. I'll try to research it and give you guys my honest take and different things like that. But again, if you made it this far, hit that like button, subscribe. We're on our way to 2,000 subscribers. Hit that bell notification so you always get notified when I drop a new video. And never, ever forget, it's you and I verse. Information, application, execution. Until next time, peace.